When did you guys get your license?
We got it in April. Very exciting times.
Right. It's been a couple of weeks. What have you been busy with?
I think we've been busy with building the bank, hiring, recruitment. That's our core focus. I think what we're looking at is how do we launch the bank within this year.
And you're still on track for that? When you look to launch?
We're still on track for that. What we're working on right now is rebuilding the core functions of the bank, but in a more innovative and more tech-driven approach. If you look at how we break this down, right? Traditional banks have their own way of doing things, but what we're looking at is how do we look at offering technologies-driven banking through innovation, technology, and we look at 3 I's. The 3 I's is instant. How do we offer financial services instantly to consumers? The second is intelligent. How do we actually use data to predict what customers need and offer them the right set of product? And the third is interactive. Interactive is how do we interact customers, not through branches, talking to people over the phone anymore, but completely through your mobile phones.
You haven't thought about pricing yet, right? In terms of how much you're willing to, because you're going to take deposits, am I correct?
That's right, that's right.
So I guess in terms of competition, I would imagine your pricing won't be that far from where the current standards are.
Yes, we haven't looked at pricing yet, but I think what we're looking at is how an innovative customer experience allow us to attract customers. If you look at, let's say, the younger millennial tech-savvy segment, what they look at is actually a better customer experience rather than incremental a few basis points on their savings.
Yeah, I mean, you worked for a bank before. I used to work for a bank, and it's common sentiment that sometimes it's very difficult to get transactions done. In terms of just competition, I mean, there's no doubt that you will cause some ripples. Do you expect people to fully switch? In other words, do I actually move out and close my traditional bank account, move to you guys, or is it more of a supplement that you see?
I think competitiveness in the market is a very interesting thing that we're seeing right now, even now before the launch, right? Just the last couple of weeks, the 4 of the major banks in Hong Kong start reducing their minimum account balance in anticipation for the virtual banks launching this year. I think we talked about that last time when I was at Bloomberg, saying that existing banks have to change the way they work. And we're seeing that right now. But I think for us, right, going forward, what we think will happen is, I think initially people will have a second bank account with virtual banks, and they'll enjoy it, use it, and then it increasingly become their core bank account. But for younger generation who come onto banking for the very first time in their lives, maybe this will be their primary bank account going forward.
Do you have a projection how many accounts you might open next year once you launch? Do you have that in your sort of business plan?
Yeah, we have it in an internal projection.
Right.
But I think we see that this is going to be the emerging trend for Hong Kong. If you look at this, right, the virtual banks will offer better, more choices for consumers, and that at the end, right, consumers will be the beneficiaries of it.
What stops the banks from doing that themselves? I mean, there's a reason why they haven't done it, but now that they see the threat of competition, what stops them from throwing money at the problem?
I think even like us bankers, we've been trying to do that in the past in the traditional banks as well.
Right.
I think what we find the difficulty was mostly the legacy system, traditional management, layers and layers of things that were built over the years. How do we unwind them, right? I think starting afresh definitely has its own benefit. And also, right, if we look at traditional retail banking was built as a branch distribution model. You have branches, telephones, and stuff like that.
Right.
And then you finally added on a layer called internet and mobile. But I think a omni-channel approach, it becomes increasingly more complex for it to break down. But if we start afresh where we only have mobile only or online only, right? I think that simplify things, allow you to have a much faster time to market. And that is very, very important in this very competitive world.
Yeah, part of why things are slow, quote unquote, at banks is because of compliance and regulation that they sort of need to protect, of course, depositors while maintaining profitability. That dynamic applies to you as well.
Yes.
You have the same regulator. How do you manage to do what you're saying you are going to do, but keeping those checks and balances properly in place so you can protect your depositors?
Legal and compliance is an extremely important part of this, right? And you're absolutely right. I think virtual banks are subject to the same regulatory regime as a normal bank. But I think virtual banks do have a competitive advantage, right? I think number one is, as we said, right, when you start afresh, you don't have layers and layers of manual processes that you built in the past. You start with the latest and most dynamic kind of regulatory regime in mind. I think that's the first thing, right? I think the second thing is also, right, when virtual banks initially offer simpler financial products, you have actually less complex or infrastructures, compliance infrastructure that you need to monitor. Traditional banks probably have a wide array of products that you need to monitor. I think that allows banks to be more specific, more nimble in that case.
I'm not going to name names. Lots of job losses were announced in the banking industry this week. Are you hiring, and what are you hiring for?
So we are massively hiring. I think this is an exciting time for virtual banks right now, but it's very specific for us too, right? Maybe we look at a couple of specific talents in areas like, for example, products, technology, compliance. These are areas that we have. I think for us, WeLab as a homegrown like fintech champion in Hong Kong, our benefit is we already have an existing team in Hong Kong versus the rest of the virtual banks. We have around 80 to 100 people in Hong Kong today, right? So what we need to do is just to plug certain skill set gaps that we don't have. Because what we're looking at specifically are bankers, open mind, intellectual curiosity, wants to do something different and build the bank that they love.
A traditional banking CEO would look at his balance sheet, his financial performance. He'd look at things like return on equity, things like that. What would you start to look at then as a measure of success?
I think we need to look at all those as well, but I think what we are going to look at as we're discussing internally with the team as well, right? What we look at is how do we build a bank, unit economics, and also customer lifetime value. Meaning, what would we versus in the past, we look at by product, it has to be profitable. But what we look at right now is the whole relationship and the customer lifetime value by cohort, how it actually becomes profitable over the years. Meaning what you bring on board a customer. Today, it may not be profitable because of acquisition costs. But over time, when they become more and more loyal with us, when we have more products and services, when they more engage with us, how do we build that over time? Right? So it will be a new way of looking at the whole P&L, managing it on a customer lifetime value by whole cohort basis.
Final question. You had IPO plans before, right? Are you reviving that, or is that something that you're not thinking of at the moment? Very quickly.
I think what we're focusing on is building the bank now to make it a fantastic virtual bank in Hong Kong, launching it by the end of this year.